Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LTA North lower bracket round number 1 overview and analysis video. In the spring playoffs, it's time to get into our first elimination series of the playoffs here. Of course, we covered the upper bracket, the first, two series that we got, the top 4 teams, at least in terms of seeding, facing off against each other to see who's going to go to winners finals. If you want to check out that video, it's going to be up in the iCard. We did that last week, but this week we get to go over the 2 series we got this past weekend, which was, of course, like I said, lower bracket round number 1, and this is going to determine not only the teams that move on to round 2, who keep themselves alive and start their lower bracket run, but also the first 2 teams officially eliminated from the playoffs. So quite a bit on the line. I'm excited. I hope you guys are as well. If you are, let me know down in the comments section below. What did you expect from these 2 series, and did they live up to your expectations? I'm certainly going to talk about it throughout this video, but I was kind of surprised by both of these series for different reasons, and we'll talk about that obviously as we get into the individual ones. But let's go ahead and get into the content. I hate wasting you guys' time. If you are new here, what we're going to do is go series by series, talking about the advantages and disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I'll be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for each series that we cover, and at the end of the video, we'll be updating the bracket and kind of talking about how I think these teams are going to function moving forward, who I think's in a good spot, who I think is not in a very good spot. Again, we're going to know top 4 by the end of this video because our 5 and 6 will be done depending on who loses today's series. But again, most of today will be spent talking about the games we got a couple of days ago, so get excited for that. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into everything. Of course, going series by series means we get to start with our first series, the one on the first day. That's generally how things tend to go, and this was the one that I think was certainly the most predictable. I would argue that both had a clear favorite, but this one much more so than the other, and we'll talk about that. It was the number 3 seeded Team Liquid taking on the number 6 seeded Dignitas, and Team Liquid is going to pick up the 3-1 series win. We expected TL to be able to dominate this series. I think the only concern is that TL had a couple of moments where they weren't exactly as consistent as maybe you would want. Losing game number 2 is not ideal. You certainly probably wanted to come out here and sweep Dignitas to really prove that you're, going to be able to go on this lower bracket run, that you're still a team that has to be, considered as a favorite in the LTA. We talk about a big 3 in the LTA. I think Team Liquid is still very much a part of that, even after getting swept by Cloud9, but there were some concerning traits in this series. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows to be able to move on to round number 2. And for Dig, as much as I'd like to sit here and be like, well, you took a game off of Team Liquid, not everything was as big of a blowout as maybe you would expect. Tomo had a pretty decent series. I think that there were moments where Isles was aggressive. Like, there were positives to take away overall for Dig. The bad for Dig this series was really bad. Like, they had a couple of moments that were just pretty horrible for the team. So obviously we'll talk about that moving forward. But player of the series is incredibly obvious. In fact, I don't even think there is any debate to be had. It's Jan in the bot lane who is going to be getting player of the series. I don't think there's anyone that you can even consider elsewhere. Games 1 and 4 were really dictated by how the bot lane ended up going, and even with Tomo playing pretty well, especially in games 2 and 3, where I think he did step up and play, fine. Like, the Sivir was a huge problem in game 2. It was the reason Dignitas ended up winning the game, and then the Ezreal was the only champion in game 3 that had any sort of relevance. Like, even with that being the case, Jan was still the better AD carry by a ginormous margin. That Kalista in game number 1 blew that game wide open by a ginormous margin. Game number 1 was probably the most dominant game of the series, although I think that's up for debate. Game 3 was certainly pretty good overall for Team Liquid. I think that had more to do with general map pressure than it did individual skill discrepancy. I think game 1 was the game where it really was like, oh, you're just better in every single lane. Every single lane is winning without really any assistance, and that's a big problem for Dignitas. But Jan being able to dominate on Kalista, and then him being the win condition on Aphelios in game number 4, champion that I really don't think is in that great of a spot right now. I don't think Aphelios is the hyper carry that I would personally be going towards. Things like Zeri and Jinx I think are just better in the current meta, but if you feel good on Aphelios, go ahead and play him, because it's clear that Jan can just carry games no matter the situation that he's in. Remember, this is the guy who was picking things like Smolder every single game, last year, because he knew he was going to win the 2v2 no matter what. He could pick these late game hyper carries and feel confident that he could come out of laning phase up in gold because he's just better than everybody that he's going into. Looks like that strategy is paying off once again, even if AD Kai'Sa did not necessarily work out in game number 2. So credit to Jan. He's been up and down, I would say, over the course of this year. Not quite as dominant as he was in 2024. Really not as dominant as he was in winter, where he kind of proved to be the best player in the LTA. He's been more of a background player on this team throughout this split to the middle of the map, who's been getting more resources, but when it matters, he's going to step up. He's still arguably the best player in the entire region, and I think that that's becoming clear. I think other players to shout out, Impact in the top lane. lane. I really wasn't expecting to talk about him so positively. Part of this is Surdy just getting rolled on the top side of the map, and Surdy's just not been very good at the tier 1 level. Of course, we'll talk about that because he was the biggest problem for Dignitas. I think that was pretty clear to me watching the series, but Impact actually being good enough to be able to take advantage of a situation like that, that's just not something we've seen from him throughout this split. I'm going to be entirely honest. I've been out on Impact all year long. I think he's been at best like a top 4 top laner in the LTA, and that's only because top lane's pretty bad. Like, if you want to say he's been better than Licorice and, I guess like Surdy would theoretically be in that conversation. Fudge, like those are the players fighting for a top 4 top lane spot right now. If you want to say Impact's in that conversation, be my guest. I saw some people putting him top 3 in terms of their all-pro voting. In fact, he did make an all-pro team. I think that's ridiculous. Like, he's not even close to top 3 in my opinion. All 3 of the top 3 top laners have been infinitely better than Impact across this year, but if he's going to step up and actually be good in the playoffs, that is going to change the complexion for Team Liquid at least a little bit, because he's been, quite frankly, unplayable at certain times throughout this split so far for Team Liquid. There have been games where it's just like, okay, dude, you're down 2,000 gold and you're giving over kills to the top laner, and the enemy top laner's carrying the game, and it's all your fault, right? Like, there have been multiple games that you can kind of talk about that because his laning has been so horrendously bad. But I guess if things are going to step up, if he's going to stabilize, and if he's actually going to be up in gold coming out of laning phase, which has not been common at all so far this year, then I think that's going to be a good thing for Team Liquid, and he was definitely the better top laner here, which is a good thing. I think APA was also pretty good throughout this series, even if people love to hate on this guy, because I do understand it, right? Like, I get why it's easy to, he's kind of made himself out to be the villain, or one of the villains of the LTA. Inspired, I think, is up there as well. Blippo, I think, is up there in terms of players that I think people are just like, narrative arc, like, let's go ahead and, shit talk the trash talkers, right? Like, that's how it goes. But APA's been awesome this year. I would argue that he's probably been their best player so far in the spring split. Like, I certainly don't think it's been consistent, but a lot of their wins come through the middle of the map, and I think APA is a big reason for that. He was really good in game 1 on the Talia, obviously dominated in game 3 on the Ziggs. Those are really the 2 games where I think APA's dominance stood out to me the most. I think the Trist game was also fine in game 4. I'm certainly not going to criticize him too heavily for that. He just wasn't quite as much of an important piece in why Team Liquid won the game as he was in game 3, especially when he got his signature pick. Core JJ, really solid here. Again, I've been lower on Core throughout the past year and a half, and so it's a little bit difficult for me to kind of, talk about this, because I think generally he did what he was supposed to do. I still don't think he's the playmaker that everybody wants him to be right now. I think that there are a lot of, supports in the league that are just doing more than Core JJ is doing at the current moment, but this was a good series, and I think he definitely was better than Isles. He is a reason why this team is so good in the 2v2, and considering Core JJ's, history and, the kind of player he was even just 4 years ago, it's cool to see that he's actually such a good 2v2 player now, because that was always his weakness even when he was in the LCK. And then finally, Yuji was full-time starting here. He played all 4 games for Team Liquid. This is clearly the direction they want to go moving forward. Yuji over Umti, not so much a 6-man roster, but Yuji actually just playing every single game. And if that's going to be the case, then we'll see how this ends up going, because at least in this series, he was on facilitator duty. He got to play Xin Zhao in game number 1, and that was fine, but the Vi, the Sejuani down the back half of the series, he really wasn't all that influential in where this series ended up going. He was definitely better than Shaden, and I think especially you look at game 3 on the Vi, and you can see a lot of tempo going in favor of Team Liquid because of Yuji, but I don't think he was the reason this team won this series, and, I think if you really want to get the most out of Yuji, you're obviously going to want him on carries at some point. That's what he does at a really high level. Not that he can't play facilitators. He's very flexible, and we saw that here. Just, you're not bringing Yuji on to play Sejuani every game. That's really not why you would sign him as a player. So, kind of out of the realm of what I expected from Yuji in this series, but overall still fine. And it's a nice win for Team Liquid, and getting themselves to round 2 is really all you needed to do. I just want to see this team get a tad bit more consistent and maybe rely a little less on just having the best player in the league, because right now Jan is bailing them out of a lot of situations. And then for Dignitas on the other side, it's just unfortunate because, like I said, I think there were a couple of positives to take away from this series. Tomo was actually really good across basically all of these games, but specifically game 2 where they won off the back of that Sivir, and then game 3 on the Ezreal where it felt like he was trying his best to keep that game within reach for Dignitas. Outside of that, though, there's just not a lot of positives to talk about. Even Kena, who has a decent KDA, was definitely outplayed by APA. Game game 1 was not good at all on the Azir. I don't think he was really all that active in game 3 on the Ahri. Like, there are multiple games you can point out where Kayn was just completely outplayed in this one. Isles, I think, had a couple of really nice engages, but for the most part, it's really just the aggressive Nico plays to set up Sivir that actually worked. Outside of that, the rest of the team couldn't actually capitalize on anything he was doing. He just continues to be exactly who we think he is, which is a slightly below average support for this level. He's playable at the LTA level. He can be in tier 1. He's never going to be an all-pro type of guy. His strength is the 2v2, and it's just really difficult to push that forward right now when the rest of the league is actually pretty good in the early game. So unfortunate for Isles, but really the biggest issue for Dignitas in this series, if you're going to point out the negatives, is the top side of the map. Both Surdy and Shaden really underperforming here today. Shaden is disappointing because he's probably been this team's best player across this year, and, you know, he's had a lot of really highlight moments. I've been really complimentary of Shaden. I think he's actually shown a lot more than what I was anticipating on a team this bad, but he got outplayed in this series. He just had no tempo, and part of that is the fact that every single one of his lanes was constantly losing. But go watch the pathing in game 3. It really felt like he had either mentally given up or just like really did not believe that they could come back in this series, because it just looked like he stopped trying to make a lot of aggressive plays as these games continued to go along, and that's really disappointing, especially because they won game number 2. So for Shaden, I just wanted to see a bit more. I really do not think he played well here today, and then Surdy got blasted on the top side. He's the easy choice for dead of the series. I think anybody who watched these games is gonna probably concur with that. I don't know, you guys tend to disagree with me down in the comments, and so I'm curious to know if that continues to go here, but Surdy was just awful in this series, and I love Surdy. Again, I've seen some people being like, oh, this guy only has an LTA job because he last picked Vayne in solo queue enough to get rank 1. Like, you have to be delusional in order to believe that. This guy has decimated tier 3 and tier 2 for many years in the professional scene. He was arguably the best player in the NACL last year for, you know, a long time, like, at any role. Like, it would be crazy to sit there and be like, Surdy only got this job, Surdy only got a tier 1 spot because of the solo queue grind. Like, that's absolutely not the case. The problem is it just hasn't translated so far. I think the biggest difference is he just can't skill check people like he did in the NACL. I think the lack of lane swaps is also hurting him, because I think generally speaking his laning phase is not nearly as consistent as maybe we wanted it to be. If you're losing to Impact, like, that means your confidence is just gone, because Impact is a horrifically bad laner, like genuinely one of the worst in the entire league, regardless of role. And Surdy was down in gold and useless in team fights, making big mistakes. It just was a bad look, specifically in game 3 on the Cassante, which again, I think could have theoretically been winnable, but it just wasn't with Surdy playing the way that he was. So for Dig, it's just unfortunate. They're going to be happy they made the playoffs again. We talked about this when they picked up that more shocking win over Lion. I think a lot of people didn't really see this as a playoff team, and for them to get in at all and get, you know, one best of 5 against an actually good team that actually goes more than 3 games. Congratulations. We get a game 4 in this series. I didn't even point that out. That's awesome for the LTA. Finally, we get a game 4. We still have no game 5 in North America, the only region to not do that. Certainly the only region that I cover to not do that. But for Dig, I think just the fact that they were able to be here is probably already a positive, even if they weren't able to get the results they wanted, and even if some of their younger players and less experienced players did not show up here today. But for Team Liquid, you just have to keep growing. This has to get better and better and better, because this team doesn't want to get 4th place. They don't want to get 3rd place. They're trying to win the LTA. They're the defending champions from last split, from this year, and for them to be in a spot where it's like, well, I mean, right now they look like a clear, you know, 3rd place team, significantly below everybody else. That's not where they want to be. I think they can get back there by the time they need to, by semifinals or lower bracket finals, to try to get themselves into top 2, perhaps even top 1. We've seen lower bracket runs crazier than that, but for Team Liquid, it's got to start soon, because the form that they're in right now, it's just really hard to convince me that this is going to translate in a way that's better than what they showed in the upper bracket in round 1. Then moving on to our second series here, and this was the one that I think people were more interested in, but I don't think anybody expected the outcome we got. It was the number 4 seeded Shopify Rebellion taking on the number 5 seeded 100 Thieves, and Shopify Rebellion is going to sweep 100 Thieves 3-0 out of the playoffs. They are going to defend their top 4 seeding, which I think a lot of people thought was pretty fraudulent, me included. I thought was pretty fraudulent throughout this split. They're going to prove that that was absolutely where they belonged, and they're going to move themselves into a top 4 spot at the end of the split. No matter what happens against Team Liquid in the lower bracket now, they are guaranteed to be top 4. Just absurd stuff from a Shopify team that's looked pretty up and down, I think, if we're trying to put it kindly, throughout this year. And for 100 Thieves, this is maybe the single most disappointing result that could have happened for them. We've talked about the LTA as a big 4, little 4 throughout the entirety of the year, and 100 Thieves have been in that conversation. They made finals in the previous split. We'll talk about it because obviously obviously, Team Liquid's moving forward, and it was TL and 100 Thieves, in finals in winter, but for this team not even to be able to get top 4 and to lose so convincingly to Shopify, to get completely outplayed in almost every single capacity, and for there to be so many mental mistakes and hands mistakes, just everything going wrong with this team, it's a massive, massive disappointment, and it's completely unacceptable. And we will talk about that as we keep going along, because there are just a couple of things that are really indicative of just how bad they were in this series. But for Shopify on the other side, player of the series for me, it's going to go to Palafaker in the mid lane, man. Palafox is going to get player of the series. He was incredible in this series, and I don't know if he's going to get enough credit for just how well he played. B-Boy got player of the series on broadcast because his scoreline, his KDA, was pretty good. I did not consider B-Boy. I'm going to be honest. I think you could make an argument he was the least important member of the team in this series, at least in terms of consistency, because, Seos really stepped up in games 2 and 3 in terms of how he played, and Palafox was incredible in games 1 and 3. He was also kind of important in game 2, if only because he drew so much pressure in the mid lane, even if he did make a pretty big mistake early on. Contracts was incredible in this series, certainly better than River on the other side of this matchup, which I'm not surprised about. I don't think a lot of people are all that surprised about that being the outcome, specifically in game 2 on the Trundle, where he was a massive problem for 100 Thieves to be able to deal with. Fudge was super big in this series. Game 1, game 2, he really stepped up. Like, everybody really played for Shopify, but for me, Palafox was the centralizing presence. When you're talking about game 1, which was the closest game, required the most amount of team fighting coming in from Shopify, that's when you're getting these gigantic realm warps from Ryze that completely set up everything that Shopify want to do. Palafox was incredible in the back half of that game, and to me, even with the Senna getting super fed, I think Ryze was really the one that was driving that comp forward, and so Palafox would have probably gotten my player of the game for game 1, and he certainly would have gotten it for game number 3 on the Victor. I don't even think that's really all that debatable. He was incredible in that third and final game. He was up in lane in every game except for game 2, where he did make a pretty big mistake early on the Annie, but after that, he got mega camped throughout the rest of that second game, and he still was super useful in the team fights. He still stepped up when it mattered the most for Shopify, and because he drew so much pressure, Contracts could really do whatever he wanted on the map, whether going for B-Boy and Seos or going for Fudge on the top side with this York to try to get a split push win condition. It just opened up so many more opportunities, and I needed to see this from Palafox. This guy's been really bad across this year. He's had flashes. It's the reason I've not compared Palafox to someone like Abadaga for DSG, because I think there has been a pretty different vibe surrounding I think just the general upside of Palafox versus Abadaga, because there's no upside right now for Abadaga with how he played. Palafox at least shows flashes of what he's looked like in the past. It's just been really, really bad for large stretches of this split, but it's there if he can unlock it, and especially him being the better mid laner into Quid. Like in a series like this against 100 Thieves, this absolutely needed to happen for Palafox, and I'm happy for him. I don't know if it really changes my outlook on him as a player. We'll see what happens in the next round against Team Liquid. That obviously is a very important one for Shopify and for a couple of these players in terms of their performance, but Palafox even having a situation like this in the playoffs against one of the best players in the LTA in Quid, like just being straight up better than him in a best of 5, it's super impressive stuff. But again, I think you can call out a couple of other members as well. Contracts is probably the other member I really considered for player of the series, even if his KDA doesn't show it. That Trundle game in game 2 was incredible from Contracts. I mean, he completely destroyed 100 Thieves in that game, like tore them apart, map adjustment by map adjustment. I think that's the best way to put it. He was everywhere, and that Sejuani had no relevance. The Rakan was horrible. We'll talk about that as we keep going along. Sniper didn't have a particularly good game in game 2 on the Renekton, but Contracts was also good on the Mundo. They've really been the team, at least in the LTA, that's indexed as heavily as anyone into Dr. Mundo jungle. I think this pick is actually pretty good. We've seen teams like CCG Esports down in the NACL really have a lot of success with this as well. I think there were a lot of advantages, and Contracts played that out really well in game 3, so big positive there. Fudge was awesome in this series, certainly better than Sniper on the other side. Fudge has been in much better form towards the back half of the split. I know he's still had quite a few bad games, because when Shopify loses, they generally look awful. But when they win, they look pretty good. And I know that can be a pretty flippy statement to make, right? Obviously, that's kind of generally how things go, but sometimes you can have players that look bad even in their wins, and that's not the case for Fudge. He's been great in their wins down the stretch, but you're mostly looking at game 2 on the York, where the split push was a problem, and then game 3, where he stifled that Riven in terms of the matchup. Now, obviously, we'll talk about 100 Thieves deciding to lane swap Riven out of a matchup into Ornn and just completely destroying Sniper's chance of being able to play game number 3, but again, we'll get into that when we talk about 100 Thieves. I thought Seos looked great here. What we're learning, I think, mostly about Seos as a player is that this guy needs to be playing Enchanters. I get that he loves Engagers, and that's kind of what he's been going towards the past couple of years, but you gotta be playing Milio and Nico Nico and, probably Nami like a bit more than maybe other teams are, because he looks so much better. This bot lane looks so much better when they're playing Lucian Milio, right? Like it's a complete night and day difference in terms of how they function. And Seos in particular, I think, is the one that really benefits the most from playing supports that are more enchanter focused, or at least more, range focused a lot more consistently. So we'll see if that, moves along. And then B-Boy actually got the broadcast player of the series. Again, I think that's much more of a KDA player of the series. His Senna was super strong in game 1, but to me, he didn't really do a ton to set himself up for that. He was more so just the recipient. I think you could say similar things for games 2 and 3. I think Seos was more of a factor in game 2, and I think, obviously generally Palafox, Contracts, Fudge were more of a factor in game number 3. So that's just my take, but Shopify just generally being better. You don't sweep 100 Thieves out of the playoffs if you're not the better team by a consistent margin. And for 100 Thieves on the other side, this is just completely unacceptable. Like, there's no way you can have this result. There's no way that this should be possible for a team of this caliber. For them to be finishing in 5th, 6th place and not even making top 4 and losing twice to Shopify Rebellion in the back half of the split, there's nothing else to say. Like, this is a massive underperformance, and it really sparks the conversation of like, well, what does this team need to do in order to get back to where they were in winter? Or were they just taking advantage of teams that had yet to peak, that had yet to scale? Cloud9 and FlyQuest had yet to get online in terms of how they've been playing the game. Are they just significantly worse than maybe we thought and they peaked early? That might actually just be the case. Ayla's going to get dead of the series for me almost entirely for that Recon game in game number 2. Horrendous stuff. Like, he played that game about as poor as I've seen anybody play a Recon in a very long time. I'm not going to hammer home the point, but Ayla's been significantly worse in Split 2 than he was in Split 1. Part of that is FBI also taking a pretty major step back in the bot lane in general, not being as good, but Ayla has certainly downgraded, I would say, in terms of his consistency and just the way he's playing the game. I think the other player that a lot of people are going to focus on here is Sniper on the top side, but again, I'm not even going to blame him entirely for how things went in Game 3. He gets his signature Riven pick to try to get them back into the series, and then they lane swap him out of the matchup into Ornn. Why? Like, what are we doing here? Do people not know what Riven is as a champion? This is one of the most brain-dead decisions I've ever seen in my entire life. The Riven now has to go down and play weak side into friggin' Varus Nico, and now Ornn gets a free laning phase. And guess what? Riven's not relevant throughout the rest of the game because she needs to dominate lane in order to be good at all in professional play, and Ornn gets to scale for free. Like, it's a completely brainless decision by a team that clearly has no idea what they're actually trying to do. I don't know who signed off on that. Maybe Sniper, it was his decision, but whoever's decision it was, it completely killed Sniper's game, and it did not allow him to play. If you want to give him dead of the series for that, I think I can understand, but I think Ayla's game 2 was a little worse. Not that Sniper wasn't also bad in games 1 and 2. I think Quid just got outplayed here today. That's probably the biggest nail in the coffin for 100 Thieves. He's obviously a tremendously good player. I still think he's the best mid laner in North America, but if he's not going to step up, if he's going to have one bad day where, you give him 3 games and he's just okay, he's not great, like, that's the death of 100 Thieves. He is the carry of this team. It doesn't matter what happens elsewhere. And this is why I've been a lot lower on players like River and FBI all year long, because I think all of it comes from the fact that Quid always has pressure in mid lane. River is not as good as people think he is because he gets to play through pressure in the middle of the map all the time. And when he doesn't have that, all of a sudden, he doesn't really do all that much in the game. I think that that's become clear. That was the case last year, and I was very vocal about that before he went to Worlds and got absolutely obliterated. I think that that's been the case once again this year. He's been good, not great, like a top 3, top 4 jungler. People are considering him for top 2. I think that that is a ridiculous sentiment. I don't even know if he's top 3 or if you can even consider him in the conversation for top 3, because when Quid loses, this team just completely falls apart. There's nobody else on this team that I believe in, and I think that that was proven. But their split is now over. I don't know what they're going to do going into the summer split. I don't think there's going to be any major roster changes again. I think this org is trying to get out of the league. I doubt they're going to pay more players going into this year, but at the end of the day, this is such a disappointing outcome, and if they needed the money, the prize money from top 4 or top 3 to be able to facilitate staying in the league longer, well, this might have just killed that. And then for Shopify on the other side, like, Palafox was incredible. If Contracts, Fudge, Palafox, Seos, B-Boy, like, if all of them can play this way against Team Liquid, who knows what can happen in a series like that, because TL certainly has not looked consistent, but this is already a gigantic upset for them to get top 4 at all, considering where they were at parts of this split is already a big accomplishment, and they've already shown how much they've improved across this year. We knew they were going to be a competitive team on paper at the beginning of the year. It just took them quite a long time to get there. All right, but that is going to do it for my LTA North lower bracket round number 1 overview and analysis video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Up on the screen, the updated bracket after we know our top 4 teams. Of course, FlyQuest and Cloud9 in winners finals. They are still going to play off for a chance to get into finals, and now Team Liquid and Shopify Rebellion will be the 2 teams moving on. We're going to go ahead and preview those 2 series. Of course, they will be the 2 series that are in the next video. Semifinals and finals will get their own separate videos as per usual, where we break down each game by game. But starting with winners finals, who do I think is going to win between FlyQuest and Cloud9? Well, at least for me, this is a pretty easy prediction in their current forms. I think FlyQuest is the best team in the LTA, and I think until proven otherwise, it's really hard for me to go in a different direction. Not only was Fly very easily able to kind of destroy Cloud9 the last time these 2 teams played, but I think even before that series, like, Fly is just more consistent as a team right now than Cloud9. That being said, that's why Cloud9 is probably going to win this series, because that's how winners finals often goes here in the LTA, is whoever's favorited is going to move on to, you know, the semifinals and then lose and get 3rd place. That's just how it always goes. But at least for now, my prediction here is going to be Fly 3-1. I don't think this is going to be as close as people want it to be. I think Fly really is head and shoulders right now above everybody in the LTA. That would be my prediction. Not quite as much as everybody getting first team All-Pro. I still think that that's ridiculous, but, you know, that's just my take on these teams in terms of how they break down. And then Team Liquid versus Shopify Rebellion. Team Liquid should win this, and they should not have problems. If they struggle against Shopify, first off, credit to Shopify. That'd be awesome for this organization and for this team, but that would give me more concerns about Team Liquid. It should be a big 3 right now in the LTA, and Team Liquid should prove that. My prediction is TL 3-0. So those are my 2, I guess, guesses, predictions. Let me know what you agree with or disagree with, whether or not you think I'm right or wrong by picking Fly and Team Liquid, or whether you think Cloud9 or Shopify have more of a chance than maybe I'm giving them credit for. Always curious to know your thoughts and opinions down below, but that's going to do it. I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it does help get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. If you're new here, hit subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. You can see it on the screen. We're going to be posting about every single game the rest of the LTA North playoff season, of course, leading into MSI, but we're covering all of the playoffs in all 3 of the other major regions as well. So LEC, LCK, and LPL. Of course, we're also covering the playoffs in the NACL, Tier 2 here in North America. So if you want a comprehensive overview of everything going on in LoL Esports, especially as we lead into MSI, this is the place for it. Hit subscribe and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos do go live. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all